Why is it so hard for some people to believe in God? The answers would probably be linked to personal, social, and possibly some intellectual reasons. What is the reasoning that leads to belief in God? When talking to an atheist, trying to prove the existence of God using the Bible will not be considered a valid argument. Sometimes the only way to convince a person of God's existence is through pure logic. How would one respond to an atheist claim that there is no God? A belief in God is a process based on three types of reason. Intellectual reasons. This line of reasoning is based on a set of facts about God you believe to be true. If you investigate these facts and find the evidence compelling, you believe he exists. If the evidence is found wanting, you either disbelieve or take on an agnostic view. Personal reasons. A person does not come to a belief in God by purely intellectual reasoning. Such belief is also a very personal one, and these reasons vary. Some people have bad experience and tragedies in their life as well as difficulties and disappointments. Some people will take these experiences and say, I really need God in my life. I can't get through this one alone, and I need help beyond my own understanding. Others will take the same set of circumstances and say either I don't need a God who lets something like this happen, or if there really is a God, he wouldn't have let this happen. Belief in God is a very personal experience, and that belief or disbelief is seen through the lens of one's own experience. And third, we have social reasons. There's a field study called the sociology of knowledge, popularized by Karl Mannheim, a professor of sociology and economics at the University of Frankfurt. Mannheim said that one tends to believe in the same things as people whom you want to befriend. These are people that you need, are dependent on, or are in a group you want to be associated with. A simpler way to say this is peer pressure. The group's beliefs seem to be more reasonable than those people whom you do not want to be associated. The most obvious example of this is the common problem of raising children in a Christian home. They read their Bible, they go to church and Sunday school, then they're off on their own, either in their teen years at home or off to college. Many will fall in with the wrong crowd. If they do not have a strong Christian background and really know Christ and know why Christ is our Redeemer, they can become lost. They find that their new friends may not have the same value system they do and may lose their faith in God. Conversely, if these same people find friends with their same worldview, the same love of God, their faith can be reinforced. It is much easier to go along with the temper of one's peer group than to set the tone for the group. As evangelist Ben Carson put it, it is harder to be a thermostat than a thermometer. Belief or non-belief in God cannot be reduced to just one of these factors. All three factors are in play. Simply put, bringing a person to a belief is a process. This process consists of three steps. One, it takes as much faith not to believe in God as it does to believe in God. Two, it takes more of a leap of faith in the dark to disbelief in God than to believe in God. And three, while one can reason to a point of probability that there is a God, it takes a personal commitment to get to know that God exists as a certainty. If one progresses through these steps, they can come to know God. So let's focus on the first step. It takes as much faith not to believe in God as it does to believe in God. In the following are going to be some arguments that are brought up to prove that there is no God. The first one is the argument from evil and suffering. This is the argument. There is senseless evil in the world, and given that pointless evil, there may be a God who is good but not powerful enough to stop it, or there may be a God who is all-powerful enough but not good enough to want to stop it. But given evil and suffering in the world, there can't be an all-good and all-powerful God, or he would stop it, and therefore the God of the Bible cannot exist. When you say there can't be a God because of all the pointless evil in the world, here's the question: how do you know it's pointless? The only answer is that the reason is not apparent. So the premise is, if one cannot think of a good reason for God to allow suffering to continue, there can't be any. That means that if you have a God that is big enough to be mad at for evil and suffering, then you have a God that is powerful enough to allow suffering to continue. You simply can't have it both ways. There are people that have had terrible things happen to them in their life, and they turn from God. At the same time, there are many people who have had every bit as much suffering, and that suffering turned them towards God. Personal suffering, the experience of suffering, or the philosophical question of suffering do not disprove the existence of God. There's the question of violence and oppression in the name of God. This is also called the Hitchkins argument against the reality of God. The argument is as follows: if there really is a God, how could his believers have done so much evil in the history of the world? The answer to that lies not in the reality of God, but in the human heart. There must be something in man that is so perverse, so prone to violence and oppression that it can actually twist any worldview, any philosophy, any state of belief with regard to God into violence. Evil is the absence of good, in the same way as darkness is the absence of light. It is possible for something created good to diminish in goodness, to become corrupted. Evil crept in when creatures endowed with free will, the angels, lesser spirits, which became demons, and human beings. They turned away from higher, more complete goods and chose lesser ones. It is arguable that Adam and Satan did not choose merely lesser goods, but fundamental evils. Augustine argued that God allowed evil to come, so that in the end greater good may prevail. He also wrote that evil was finite, limited, and ultimately to be overcome, and that good was infinite. Therefore, God then did not cause sin to happen, but when sin came into the world, he chose to allow it to occur, so that greater good could emerge. What appears to be evil at first may be seen as a path towards a greater good. The death of Christ on the cross was an evil, but the ultimate good, the triumph of salvation, came out of it. Atheists will admit the existence of good, altruism, philanthropy, etc. is a problem for their worldview, because it does not make evolutionary sense, as it would if chance creation and natural selection were true. So atheists are left with the reality of evil. Next step, it takes more of a leap of faith in the dark to disbelieve in God than to believe in God. There were those who sought to prove that the earth was flat with a similar argument. That line of reasoning was eventually disproved and is considered irrational. Furthermore, good science can only offer hypotheses and theories based on the data currently available to explain phenomena. Therefore, by the very standards that science uses, the burden of disproof of the existence of God must be borne by the atheist. The argument people will make is, until you prove there is God, until you show rational, empirical proof, I don't have to believe in God. Therefore, until you prove there is a God, there is no God. And the problem with that stance is a big leap of faith. Even those people who believe that our reality isn't real still look both ways before they cross the street. How can one prove that God who created the universe is not somewhere in the universe? I suppose one could also say that they believe Manhattan does not exist if they have not gone to Manhattan themselves. Why then does God have to be so inside the world that he can be provable? The very argument also requires a leap of faith. One is actually assuming something about the nature of God in order to say he does not exist. C.S. Lewis wrote an article in 1961 that addresses this issue. The Russians were the first country to send somebody into space, Yuri Gagarin. After his flight, Gagarin came back, and a few months later, at the premiere of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev was giving a speech at the Central Committee of the CPSU. In talking about atheism, he said, Gagarin flew into space but did not see any God there. It's interesting to note that Gagarin himself was a member of the Russian Orthodox Church. In response, C.S. Lewis wrote this, If there's a God who created the world and created us, I can no more meet him than Hamlet could meet Shakespeare. If Hamlet wants to prove there's a Shakespeare, he's not going to be able to do it in a lab, nor is he going to be able to find Shakespeare by going to the top of the stage. The only way he will know something about Shakespeare is if Shakespeare writes something about himself into the play. What that means is if there's a creator God, you can only prove his existence if he injects himself into his own creation, or into you. If one can't prove that there is no God, that also means that there may be a God, just one whom we can't prove exists. If one is living their life as if there is no God because his existence can't be proven, then there's a risk. Disbelief is an act of faith. Disbelief is as much an act of faith as a person who gives themselves to God, and the one who does not believe is taking their destiny into their own hands. Also, the existence of God makes more sense of the things in the observable universe than if there is no God. Two examples of this are the anthropic principle and the human rights. One of the most compelling evidences supporting the theistic worldview involves the anthropic principle. The principle observes that the earth is fashioned so precisely that life could not exist if the earth were even minutely different. Atheists acknowledge this and then argue that although the universe is incredibly complex and wonderfully ordered, one should not be surprised that life came into existence through random process, because the very fact that we exist demonstrates that evolution occurred. The fundamental problem with this argument is that it is merely a philosophical statement that relies on circular reasoning. It assumes that chance accounts for the origin of life and then states because life exists, there's proof that life came to be by chance. The value of the principle as support for God lies in its recognition that life can exist only within very narrow margins. For example, if the Earth was located farther from the sun, life could not exist due to excessive heat or cold. If the chemical composition of the atmosphere varied only slightly, the air would be poisonous to life. If the sea to land mass ratio, depths of the ocean, and the Earth's cloud cover were different, the Earth's ability to store and release heat would change dramatically. All such events could result in the absence of life on Earth. Rather than all these variables being the result of accidental process or luck, it appears much more probable that the Earth was specifically designed to sustain life. And if it was designed, there must be a designer God. Human rights is the belief that human beings are so worthwhile that regardless of age, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of gender, regardless of social status, or regardless of how much wealth you have, every human being is of great worth and has certain rights that can't be exploited or trampled upon. Now the question comes, why should we believe that? Is it that we believe that God created human beings and therefore they are sacred? They are made in the image of God. Or maybe we find this in nature. If we look out at nature, do we see that human beings as individuals are valuable? No, because all you see out there is the strong eating the weak, and that's how you got here. It's called evolution. To believe in human rights is to say that everything else in nature is wrong. But why could it be wrong unless you believe in God or a supernatural standard by which to judge? How can you judge that nature is unnatural? And where did you get your idea? Yes, the third possibility is that human beings form human rights ourselves. Legislative majorities create human rights. They are not discovered, they are legislated. Morality is something man creates, so we create it. Society, through a legislative majority, decided human rights make society work better, and therefore it's more practical to believe in human rights. So man creates human rights, but that will never work. What the argument is advocating is a belief, for example, that genocide is only wrong because man says it is. Therefore, if 51% want to vote to take away the rights of 49% and destroy them, nobody can say, how dare you? Because genocide is wrong only because man says it's wrong, and now a majority doesn't say it's wrong. By this argument, the whole value of rights is to say to the majority, you have to honor the rights of others. Human rights are discovered, they can't be created. They don't come from nature, they aren't created, they just exist. So if one doesn't believe in God, does one believe in human rights? The answer would be they're just there. We don't know why they're there, they probably shouldn't be there, but they're there. So do human rights prove there's a God? No. The point of the argument is that human rights make sense. If there's no God, human rights don't make much sense, since one doesn't know where they came from. If this is true, then a belief in God makes more sense than a non-belief. One can't prove God. One can only show that in issue after issue, the existence of God makes more sense than the absence of one. If there's a God, then the idea of justice and injustice and the idea of genocide being wrong makes sense. If there's no God, it takes a leap of faith to say, I don't know why it's wrong, it just feels like it's wrong. It's a bigger leap of faith to believe in human rights if one doesn't believe in God than if he does. It's a leap of faith to say somehow human beings are valuable if there is no God than if there is. So why would one say they do not believe in God? Why is it so hard to believe in God? The reasons would probably be linked to personal, social, and possibly some intellectual reasons. All of the arguments I've made only takes us through one of the realm of possibilities. It only goes to prove that it is more likely God does exist rather than does not exist. Ultimately, the issue becomes one of personal commitment. Weak faith in something strong is infinitely better than strong faith in something weak, because it is the object of one's faith, not the strength of that faith, that saves him. One can rationalize all they want, but until one makes a personal commitment, one can't really know. As I mentioned earlier, C.S. Lewis said that if there's a God, the only way one would know about him is if he was like Shakespeare. He would have to write some information about himself into the play. And that's exactly what the Bible attests to. Christianity says God wrote himself into the play. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. This is our Sunday message from yesterday, so I apologize it's up a little bit late. Please remember again to like, share, and subscribe. If you wish to donate to our channel and you enjoy our content, we have several different options. Of course, PayPal, Patreon, and our 316 Exposure Christian Apparel. All links are below in the description. That's all I have for now, so enjoy your week. Until next time, God bless you and your families. Thank you.